The views and opinions expressed by the hosts do not state or reflect those of the company and its management. Furthermore, the assumptions, views, opinions, and insinuations made by the hosts or the guests do not reflect those of the show, the management, and the company.
Identify, discussed, understand. Casting live from Manila, Philippines, we are Simply Security, helping you streamline security easily.
Good evening, Philippines.
Good evening, listeners.
Welcome back to another episode of Simply Security on our second season, recorded live today, 14th of April 2021. I am Miles Melia.
And of course, we would like to thank everyone who are joining us today in Zoom and also those who are watching us via Facebook. My name is Eric Kalindogan,
Welcome to Simply Security.
helping you streamline security easily.
Nice to see you again, Eric.
It's been a long time, Miles. How are you?
I'm good, and we would like to thank Alan for representing you last
Yes,
episode.
last episode. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to join you, but
Mm-mm.
I made sure that I didn't miss any
You're
of the
there.
discussions that you had. Yeah, sure. All right,
That's
so
right. So tonight, we are excited to have a very well decorated and accomplished oceanographer. He's laughing right now, and marine scientist who will be sharing his insights about our topic tonight. Go ahead, Eric.
all right, special guest tonight. He's currently an associate professor at the University of the Philippines Marine Science Institute, and he's the youngest faculty member of the institution as of March 2021. In 2019, he was the chief scientist of the Protect WPS, or the Predicting Responses Between Ocean Transport and Ecological Connectivity of Threatened Ecosystems in the West Philippine Sea expedition group, which conducted research in the Spratly Islands.
Currently, he is known for being the first Filipino to descend into the Mden Deep, the deepest point in the Philippine Trench and third deepest in the world. His expedition started off in Guam on March 15 with Caladan Oceanic and renowned undersea explorer Victor Lanz Vescovo. He agreed to take part in the expedition to assert the sovereign rights of the Philippines over the underwater feature. The descent took place on March 23rd. At the Amden Deep, he waved the Philippine flag.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to welcome in the podcast our dear friend, Dr. Deo Florence Onda. Good evening,
Hi,
Deo.
good evening, Miles, and good evening, Eric. And thank you for that very generous introduction. It's
Of
actually quite
course.
nice to see you after a long while. For those who
Yes,
do
it's
not know, Eric, Miles, and I were actually good friends way back in college. So it's nice to
Yeah.
see you again here.
Yeah, we're
likewise.
we are celebrating with you the past weeks, especially with your recent triumph. Now, let's get the ball rolling. So, Deo, with your marine science background, can you give us an idea how rich and important is the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea, among its surrounding countries, especially in the Philippines?
Yeah, probably Miles, before I actually start talking about the West Philippine Sea, let's just make some, delineations on
Right.
where things are.
Sure.
When we talk about the South China Sea, it's the entirety of the South China Sea. It's all the waters covering from the south of China to Vietnam, Philippines, Southeast Asia, and then Taiwan. So that's the entirety of the South China Sea. And when we talk about the West Philippine Sea, these are the waters within the 200 nautical mile zone of the
Right.
Philippines, including the extension of this in a Kalayaan Island group, which extends a bit outside of the EEZ because we have claims on those. So that's when you talk about the West Philippine Sea, those are the waters that we are talking about. And we are not putting a claim on all the waters that we
Of
find
course.
in the entire South China Sea. I think that sometimes it's a misconception of the Filipinos, right? So how important is it? 50% of the population of the Philippines actually live on the coast. And in the data in the 20 in the before the 2000 or in the 90s, they were saying that the fisheries, the food that we are getting from the West Philippine Sea, actually contribute around 20% of the total 20% of the total fisheries capture fisheries of the country. So the
Mhm.
20% of the fish and all the other seafoods that we eat are actually coming from the west of the Philippine Sea. In terms of tourism, many of the tourist sites are actually located on the west of the Philippines, and that would
Mhm.
include Palawan being a
Right.
major tourism destination, including Batangas, including some of the diving sites in Ilocos. So there's a lot at stake there. Because when we talk about the West Philippine Sea, we are just not talking about what we're getting as food. We should also be talking about tourism. We should also be
Right.
talking about trade transport. Manila Bay, which is a major port in the Philippines, is actually located in the west of the Philippines. So there's really a lot at stake. I think in a publication or in a report released by PEMC in 2018, they were saying that 7% of the total GDP of the country, 7% of it is actually being contributed by ocean economy. And
Mhm.
the West Philippine Sea, being a 40% of the total marine waters of the country, contributes around probably 40% of the 7%. So that's a big contribution from the West Philippine Sea. And we also need to talk about the ecological importance. There are services in the environment that are being given by the organisms, the coral reefs, and the other marine habitats that we cannot see but actually sustain us. So that includes, for
Mhm.
example, uh, its role in climate change, absorption of carbon
Mhm.
dioxide, regulation of ocean acidification, cleaning of the oceans by absorbing pollutants. So those are part of the services that make the earth habitable. We do not necessarily see it directly
See them.
affecting us.
Yeah.
Yes. We don't
Mhm.
necessarily sense them, but they are sustaining life on earth. So those are some of the, important roles of the West Philippine Sea to the Filipinos.
Yeah. And in your knowledge, Leo, how big is I mean, in terms of the activities that is happening in the West Philippine Sea. So, how big is the impact of this kinds of activities when it comes to when we talk about biodiversity?
So when we talk about, sorry, just to clarify, when you say activities, these are the fishing and other activities
Mm-hmm.
related in the area?
Yes.
Yeah, when we went there in 2019, when we led an expedition and also tried to compare the data that we collected with the past decade data
Mm-hmm.
that has been collected by other researchers, we've seen significant decrease, for example, in some of the indicators. So indicators are the things that we compare with the baseline and see if there are
Right.
changes or deviations from that. So one of the indicators that we are looking at, for example, is the extent of coral cover.
Mm-hmm.
What is the percentage of the coral reefs are still covered by healthy corals? So that's one indication. And studies suggest and results showed that there had been a 20 to 50% decrease in some of the
Mm-hmm.
coral covers in some of the areas of the West Philippine Sea. That is actually very significant because it means that 50% of your reef is not healthy anymore, or no healthy coral reef is covering 50% of the area. And
Right.
coral reefs are important because they are the major building blocks of an ecosystem. You remove the coral reefs, you remove the habitat where the fish can lay their eggs, where they can feed, and where they can reproduce. So that would affect the other, functions of the ecosystem. Other indications that there had been some changes in the West Philippine Sea include the decrease in the biomass and
Mm-hmm.
the diversity of fish that we
Mm-hmm.
can actually catch in these areas. So these are indications that the environment has changed. But I think the tricky question right now with what you posted, Eric, is that it's really a challenge for us scientists to delineate how many of this or what percent of these changes were actually contributed by natural changes.
Yeah, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Even without human intervention, the environment will change, and how
Mm-hmm.
much of this were actually contributed by direct human activities. And that
Mhm.
is, I think, where what we do as scientists, the monitoring, the reef assessments, the surveys that we do, that's where it comes to be very significant. Because
Mhm.
without baseline data, we cannot delineate how much has changed because of human
Cannot
activity.
compare.
Right.
We cannot compare and we cannot draw some
Yeah.
Yeah.
insights of what caused these changes
Mhm.
Yeah.
and what can we do to actually prevent these changes. And I think that's where the work of the scientists actually really come to be very important.
And in line
And
with this,
mhm.
Deo. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Mars.
I'm just very curious to know, Deo. When you talked about um, related literature, past researches, are we talking about
Yeah.
one made in the Philippines, or are these foreign researches?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for asking that. The no, because in the past 25 years, the MSI being the National Center for
Right.
Marine Science Research, we've been to the West Philippine Sea. And when I talk about the West Philippine Sea in this context, these are the offshore environments, including
Mhm.
the Spratlys, the Kalayaan Island Group. The MSI has just launched or carried out around 8 expeditions in the past 25 years. Eight
Wow.
expeditions. And each of these expedition would only be around 5 weeks to around a week or 2 weeks at most. So what we are
Mhm.
getting are just capture, a snapshot of
Snapshot. Yeah.
what has happened in the environment at that particular point in time. So we're very limited. There's a dearth of data on what that we can use to actually, pull out some insights on what's happening in the West Philippine Sea. Majority of what we know in the West Philippine Sea are still from Filipino scientists.
Okay.
Mm.
But in a review that we did a year ago or 2 years ago with some of my colleagues, we are now seeing really an increase in the number of scientific literature within or done within the EEZ of the Philippines from
Mhm.
Chinese scientists.
Oh,
Mm.
there are more researches from them, or updated researches?
Yes, not only that, they actually, for us scientists, the way we publish it is through journals, scientific journals,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
And they are actually now publishing their own scientific journal. It's called a Journal of Tropical Sciences, uh, which majority of those studies that were published in that journal were actually based on the studies that they've done in the South China Sea. You know what's alarming with this? In many of the maps that they use,
Mhm.
they actually use the nine dash line. So it
That's the
kind of
reference.
Yeah.
not just the reference, it kind of solidifies on
It's
their
where their
part that
stands.
Yeah.
this is our stand, these are our waters,
Yeah.
and I think it's very problematic, right? Because
Right.
these are our waters. For them to understand it more would mean them allowing them to actually manage and utilize some of the
Right.
resources that we do not know that are actually in the West Philippines.
Yeah. And then, as
Interesting.
a marine scientist, what are the usual challenges that you encounter when you do these kinds of expeditions, or
uh, as a,
A
you
lot.
know, although the Philippines is actually 82% water, if you're gonna consider the EEZ and the extended continental
Mhm.
shelf in the Benham Rise and the Kalayaan Island Group, believe it or not, we are very much limited with our capacity to do ocean research. When I said capacity, it
Yeah, yeah.
includes the infrastructures and the
Mhm.
vessels. After 45 years, the MSI, it was the first time that MSI was able to have its own research vessel in 2019.
It was
Oh wow.
before,
So,
no? You were using
well,
before?
we were
Before.
using the FAR, we were using the Philippine Coast Guard vessel, but these vessels are not really dedicated for research. Sometimes we
Mm.
got bumped off. Sometimes our schedules get canceled because they need to use the vessel for something else. Sometimes
Mhm.
there's just no funding. So
Mm.
even if there's the willingness to go, but we don't have any vessel to go there, I mean, we cannot do anything. The other is funding. The one of the reasons why the expeditions had been very rare or sparse throughout the years is because also of funding. Going to the ocean and doing research is not it's not a cheap initiative.
Mm.
Mhm.
So it's really quite difficult to get assured funding and sustain funding throughout the years. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's very opportunistic. When the money comes in, then we go on expedition and we are not sure if we will be able to go out again the following
Again,
year.
right.
Yes. And I think one of the limitations at the national scale is also expertise. In a country that is very archipelagic, we only have a few oceanographers. We only have a few marine scientists, which is actually
Yeah.
quite sad, right? I mean, we are
Like
Right.
surrounded
when
by
you say
water.
few, how many?
I think right now we probably on an estimate would be around 17 to 21 oceanographers.
Oh wow.
17 to 21. And I think 30 to 40% of that you would find that in the Marine Science Institute. So
UP.
so there's not much decentralization of the expertise. And I think that really has a lot of repercussions on how much understanding we have of our oceans. I think the other thing is security. We cannot deny the fact that going to the West Philippine Sea in a geopolitically, hotspot, it's a hotspot for
Right.
geopolitical discussions.
Mhm.
All the risk of going there is always present. And sometimes I remember in 2017 and 2018, the expedition team was actually already ready to go to the West Philippine Sea, but the entire expedition that got canceled the day before we leave because of heightened security threats and risks in the West Philippine Sea, which is again very sad because science is in a way neutral and science is
Non-political.
universal. It's yeah, non-political, but we still get affected because of the situation. So there's really a lot of challenges and
Right.
limitations when we do ocean research in the Philippines.
Dave, how does it work? Like, if one of the for instance, let's just say, like, if one of the disputing state or country decides to conduct research over a disputed territory, is there an actual coordination happening between these
Mm.
contesting countries, or is there like what do you call that, like an abbreviation body who facilitates and manages it?
Yeah, so by law, I think by international guidelines under the
Mhm.
UNCLOS, MSR was actually defined under UNCLOS. The marine scientific
Mhm.
research is an activity to generate new knowledge and understand the environment. So any endeavor that would result into that is considered a marine scientific research activity. So under UNCLOS, MSR is allowed inside the EEZ of the countries. However, if it is within an EEZ of the country, the foreign researchers need to seek permission from the government of that country through
Right.
for example, in our case, through the Department of Foreign
PFA.
Affairs.
Yes.
There are a couple of reasons why this is actually being done. One is to secure that the entire endeavor actually is very scientific or purely for scientific purposes. The
Mhm.
second is to also ensure that the activity would always entail the participation of a local scientist.
Right.
Because it is seen as an opportunity to do change of expertise, technical know-hows, information, development of science in general. And the third is to make sure that the Philippine government would have an observer on board the foreign
Right.
vessel, just to check if what they're doing are actually the things that they proposed to do. So there's a couple of reasons why we're doing that. So before a country can go in and do marine scientific research, they need to go through this process. The
Mhm.
West Philippine Sea is a bit tricky because there's a lot of claimant countries.
Right.
So our stand is, I cannot speak on behalf of the other countries, but our stand is because we are claiming it as our EEZ, therefore this country is doing scientific research in these waters should secure permission from the Philippine government.
Mhm.
Is there any?
Is there any? I would say that I myself had partnered with a lot or several foreign institutions, and we undergo
Mhm.
the process. I think
Mhm.
that's where the China issue comes in because they've done a lot of scientific research in the
But
west of the
we
Philippines.
didn't
Not just,
know
but
it
we didn't know.
happened.
There was actually no Filipino on board. There were a
Right.
couple of initiatives when some Chinese institutions whom we partnered with actually seek permission. At least for those researchers who worked with us, we always
Mhm.
make sure that there was actually a permission. But we've seen it in the past 2 years, even though the MSR itself was banned by the Philippine government. So I don't remember. I don't know if you still remember the issue with one of the Chinese vessels going into the Philippine rice on
Bedtime
the east
rights.
of the
Right.
Philippines in 2018.
Right.
It kind of sparked an outrage on the part of the Filipino people, right? There was a public outrage about it. And then overnight, the Philippine president decided that we're just going to revoke all the permissions that we've already given out, and we will ban foreign MSR, meaning foreign institutions coming in to do marine scientific research. And it went on for 2 years.
Right.
Remember, that was really difficult for us that time because we also had a lot of international
Partners.
partnerships.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
And we rely in these international partnerships or partners for the vessels because that time we still did not have our own vessels.
Right.
So yeah, so in 2018 that happened. But even though there was a ban for 2 years, we've seen a lot of reports and we've seen some evidence that many of the research vessels from China actually went into the different parts of the Philippines. They did not declare it as marine scientific research, but at least the patterns of their route, how many hours they
Mm-mm.
stayed in a certain area, and even the identity of these vessels, it suggests that they've done some marine
Yeah.
scientific research. What were the type of data that they gathered? We do not know. What were they doing there? We do not know. And I think that's a problem on our part because they were
Right.
already seeing, understanding something, and probably already exploring how to use them without knowing it.
Right.
Remember that all
Apparently,
the, yes.
yeah. Apparently, there's proof. You've seen the researches. Just kidding.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's actually quite funny because
Yeah.
I've seen this as studies, Um, as a standard practice, for example, in the scientific community, when you go to another country to collect samples or to collect data, you also need to submit. There's a section there that says that these samples or data were gathered according to the laws of the country, sort of
Okay.
things like that.
Like a
But because
disclaimer.
there's a disclaimer, or at least there's a clearance. You have a
Mm-mm.
proof that there's a clearance. But the funny thing about some of the Chinese researchers is that they were published in a Chinese published journal. So technically, there's nothing wrong for them if they publish it without the clearance from the local country, right? There is no filter. There is no way to actually check it because it's a Chinese publication anyway. So they have all the right and the means to actually just publish it. And I
True.
think that is actually a problem. In one of the talks, I mentioned this to be part of what China is doing right now, especially with the illegal. I would call it illegal because there were no permissions. The illegal
Mm-mm.
marine scientific research that they've done in the Philippines. It's actually I see it as part of the phases of Chinese aggression. Phase one being sending a militia or sending a fishing fleet to actually just gather everything. The second would be barricading,
Right.
and then the third would be the start of
Exploring.
reclamation, and then putting up bases. And the fourth is actually
Oh.
illegal MSR. It's marine scientific research. Why? Because MSR is the first step in understanding how to utilize resources. You
Mm.
cannot utilize anything if you do not know what is to utilize out there. You cannot
Right.
utilize it if you do not know how to utilize it. So, marine scientific research, scientific information is important because it allows you to actually explore and later utilize these resources. And we
Mm.
are already losing in this battle compared to China. We are already losing this battle because they now have three other research stations in the area.
Okay.
For
And
the
they
Philippines,
for
yeah,
those
sorry.
research facilities, would you happen to know what
What
studies
are
are
they
they
looking
doing?
for? What they're
Yeah.
studying?
The funny thing is that I also know some of the scientists who actually work there.
Of course,
you know,
you're a small community.
yeah, we
Mm-hmm.
are a small community. Yeah, the objective actually of this research stations is one to understand basic science, understand the ecology, understand the
Mm-hmm.
oceanography, the diversity. But they've also put some equipment and facilities specifically for understanding how they will be able to utilize ocean energy, how they will be able to utilize biotechnology. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
bacteria that you find in the ocean can actually be sources of drugs.
Mm.
Right. Right.
Mm.
So we call it bioprospecting. And there are certain facilities and even people I know who actually work specifically on this. They've
Mm-hmm.
also started understanding the area for the possibility of putting mariculture. In the Philippines, we have mariculture areas for bangus, right? It
Mm-hmm.
allows us to produce many fishes for many Filipinos. But the problem is that doing mariculture on the coastal areas would result into pollution and eutrophication.
Yeah,
But
because of the
doing it in
foods.
open area like the open ocean, it kind of solves some of the problems. And
Right.
China has been developing open ocean mariculture technology. They've actually rolled out some of this with Norway. So it is not just an idea anymore. They already have a proof of concept.
Mhm.
So we can actually look at from the fourth phase, which is just marine scientific research, we can now look at it into more into turning the South China Sea as a food basket for the Chinese,
Yeah.
because
Mm,
Yeah.
it will actually allow them to produce more food by having open ocean mariculture. The Philippines is also one of the largest exporters of seaweeds to China, and we know seaweeds, food, cosmetics, and other applications.
yeah.
They are now developing seaweed technology to actually grow their own seaweeds in the lands or in the islands that they've reclaimed in China, in the Spratlys. So it would allow them food sufficiency, which again leads to the question of food security. China is
Sure.
actually trying to be food independent right now by expanding their backyard, by expanding their garden, and actually claiming more areas where they can grow their own food. So these are all connected, you know.
Yeah.
It's not a passive reclamation. It's not just a passive claiming of a territory. They are making use of it, and the
Mhm.
reason why they're able to use it is because they're doing a lot of research on it.
Yeah, they have a bank of knowledge on that. Now,
Yes.
Dr. Deo, as the chief scientist of the Protect West Philippine Sea, this is a lame question actually, but were you the one who named the Protect? Because this is actually the first time that I knew the meaning of it, like predicting responses between
Responses,
ocean
yeah.
transport,
No,
It's like
ecology.
Shield, Marvel
yeah,
Shield.
no. It's actually a tradition in the scientific community to come up with a nickname for every project or every endeavor,
Right.
because it's just easier to understand, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think for the West Philippines, it's more special because as Filipino scientists, we would like to see our work as a contribution in asserting the sovereign rights of the country and putting forward an advocacy for the West Philippine Sea. So it's actually an idea of many scientists, but I'd like to acknowledge one of the scientists who actually came up with this. You know, there were a lot of suggestions to
Names.
came up with
Right.
Protect, which is Dr. Hazel Arceo from the University of the Philippines, Visayas in Cebu. And she
Oh.
came up with this name because that time there was another project in the Philippine rice, and
Mhm.
the
Mm.
title of the project for the Philippine rice was Secure Philippine Rice. But of course, there's
Ah.
a scientific terms included in that abbreviation. But we thought that it's quite poetic,
It
And there's
is.
saying,
already like an
yeah,
impression being put in there.
right? And
Yeah.
also the advocacy would already come in. It's
Right.
protect WPS. It's for me. It's very apolitical. It's non-political. It's just calling for the protection of it by understanding the science behind it.
It's a nice call. Now tell us about this. I mean, what pushed you to have this project? Who's funding it, and what have you accomplished so far?
Yeah, the Protect WPS was a continuation of another project funded by DNR in 2017. So I think it was the
Mm,
first time that a full load of scientists actually again went to the west of the Philippines, funded by the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, and then there were a lot of learnings in that expedition. So DNR
Mhm.
decided that I think we need to work with MSI again, and thus the expedition in 2019. Um, there is going to be another Protect WPS expedition. We've gained a lot of understanding of the environment, but it also opened up a lot of questions. As we gain more understanding, it always more questions on the
More
way.
questions. Yeah.
Yes. So what were some of the initial or major findings that we had? First is that coral reef status in the West Philippine Sea is actually deteriorating.
Mhm.
I think the question again there is that whether how much of this were actually, caused by human activities and how much is because of the environment or climate change. But we have also seen evidence of direct human activities such as cyanide poisoning, cyanide
Mhm.
use in some of the reefs. We've seen crevices caused by blast fishing, dynamite fishing. We've seen some corals that were just that were just collected, so it kind of had broken everything. We also saw some cases of giant clam harvesting.
Okay.
So it's a proof, it's an evidence that human activities are actually affecting the environment. The second thing that we found is that the fish abundance, diversity have also been declining throughout the
Mm.
years, especially on some of the monitoring stations we have. Again, the question is it because of the environment, because the corals are degrading and the environment is degrading, or is it because of the illegal fishing activities? If it's
Anthropogenic.
because yet or anthropogenic, if it's the supply of the fish has been dwindling, we need to ask the
Mhm.
question. In the 90s, again, the West Philippine Sea was estimated to actually contribute 20% of the total capture fisheries of the country. In 2018, BIFAR released a report that it only contributed less than 2%. So that was a significant
Wow.
decrease from 20 to 2%. But we need to ask the question again, what caused the decrease? Is it because the environment is changing? Is it
Mhm.
because we're not getting anything from the West Philippine Sea anymore? Or is it because someone is actually getting the fish and not us? Right? So these are
And
actually
someone is
questions.
preventing our marine scientists to know the answers.
And someone is actually preventing our fisher folks from
Yeah.
accessing these waters, right? So these are actually valid questions that we need to answer if we are going to talk about food security. Other major findings that we found is that the West Philippine Sea is highly diverse. For example, using seaweeds as a indicator, before we went in 2019, our botanists in the Marine Science Institute only reported a couple of species of seaweeds present in the West Philippine Sea, or at least in some of the features in the West Philippine Sea. After diving just for 5 days, they reported 70 more new records of species and possibly new species of seaweeds in the West Philippine Sea. It just tells you that we just have not discovered everything yet.
Yeah.
It just tells us that the
Just
West Philippine Sea is
starting.
actually so diverse and we are just starting to understand it. And that's the reason why we are pushing for more marine scientific research. On my part, one of my interests really is looking at the imprints of human contamination. So
Right.
we also saw, sadly, we also saw a lot of plastics in marine debris,
Microplastics. Yeah.
not just microplastics, actually floating plastic debris that accumulated in many of the islands in the West Philippine Sea. It kind of tells us two things. One is that whatever we do on land affects everything in the ocean. And then
Right.
second is that everything is connected. What we the things that we do here will always have a repercussion somewhere else. And I think that plastic, when we went back into the brands of the plastics, we did a brand survey. Many of the products that we saw actually came from Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Vietnam, Taiwan, mainland China, Philippines. So it just tells I called it the Southeast the Association of Southeast Asian Trash or Basura, because it's a convention of different garbage and trash coming from the different Southeast Asian countries. And it was actually very, it also tells us that the problem of marine debris and plastic is actually a transnational boundary
It
problem.
Of
is.
course.
It is.
Right.
Your trash will actually go to another backyard, and my trash will go to
Mm.
another backyard. And we need to understand it as a region.
All right. Eric, you have, yeah,
Um,
go.
I think on my end, Deo, let's say in the best of your knowledge, would you know what kind of marine scientific research do Philippines and China individually or joint are currently being conducted, in that particular area?
In
Yeah,
common.
yeah.
Mm.
I think we also need to acknowledge the fact that although there are some sort of disagreements between the
Mm-hmm.
countries, we need to understand that science in general would actually benefit everyone, unless the one doing the science will actually use it for something else. So despite everything, the Filipino scientists are still trying to work with not only with the Chinese scientists, but actually the scientists within the Southeast Asian region. I was in a meeting. It's a South China Sea, Southeast Asia, a joint meeting on science and technology in the South China Sea. in 2018. And then we actually talked about these problems. What are the common problems that we as a region can solve all together or together, And we've talked about illegal fishing. We've talked
Mhm.
about the dwindling stocks of fish around the South China Sea. We've talked about marine pollution. We've talked about harmful algae or red tide because it's really a big problem around around the South China Sea. We've talked about climate change. And all of these countries are actually doing research on this. And we are cooperating with them on this. And I think the funny thing is that also in the same meeting, when we talked about the dwindling stocks of fisheries in the South China Sea, one of the scientists or a representative from the government of China actually said, but we are implementing a closed season for fishing in the South China Sea.
Right.
They
Remember
are.
this.
Yes, and they
Mhm.
are. But he asked, why don't you just follow us? That's the politic. That's where the politics could actually
The
come in.
politics are coming in. Right.
One, we agree that there is a need to control fishing by having closed seasons for fishing. But if we all agree to follow China's lead, would it actually be tantamount to recognizing China's authority in these waters?
An
Exactly.
influence. True.
Right? So even though we agree, it's a bit complicated because the power play and the political part would actually come in. And I think it also highlights the fact that there is no regional fisheries management organization in the South China Sea. There's no organization that
That
would
could be
actually
the
set,
venue.
which could
Yeah.
be the venue, that could set out the rules and the guidelines, and that could set out the guidelines for policing.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, actually, the question there is that would actually China be amenable to it?
Are,
Would they? Do they
are they
actually
going
want
to
to be policed?
yeah,
Do they want to have like
or
a bigger brother?
Yeah. I
and
mean,
what role would they like
there
to
are
play?
there were a lot of opportunities in the past and now where China can actually come in as a good big brother. If it wants to gain the credibility and also
The
the
trust.
trust and the confidence of the other Southeast Asian countries, there were a lot of opportunities where it can come in to show that it is actually responsible brother. But I
Hmm.
think the question lingers and the question remains, how much are we able to actually trust China? Will China actually stick with its own words, with its own promises? And we've also seen many evidence that it does not or it did not. So I think that's really the problem right now, and also a challenge for us to understand these international relations.
Interesting, Deo. You've posted the questions. Now, this is related to that. Okay, almost after a week of your successful descent to the Emden Deep in the Philippine Trench, there were reports of bullying in the West Philippine Sea.
Yeah.
And of course, it's not hard to find
Right.
because we have satellites. We can monitor this. But before you answer that, we will have a quick break and Simply Security will be right back.
Okay.
Tonight's episode is brought to you by Business Profiles Incorporated, leading the way to strategic corporate risk and security management solutions. Business Profiles Incorporated, our business is to keep you in business. Black Pearl Consultancy, bringing intelligence analysis, travel security, and business continuity support to new heights. Black Pearl Consultancy, intelligence for smarter decisions.
BP Argus Security Services Incorporated. For holistic industrial protection, BP Argus Security Services is committed to the highest standards of providing effective security manpower services. Blue Force Security Services, the security manpower choice by many companies and organizations in the Philippines. Blue Force Security Services, delivering quality protection and service integrity to your corporate needs.
Chronicle Data and Research Solutions. Chronicle Data and Research Solutions provides comprehensive corporate inquiries and background checks for businesses and organizations. Chronicle Data and Research Solutions, delivering concise, factual, and relevant service through expertise and trust. Silverpoint Training and Development, the knowledge and skill building arm of Business Profiles Inc. offering the latest, most practical and strategic briefings and corporate trainings in the field of business security.
Casting live from Manila, Philippines, we are Simply Security, helping you streamline security easily.
Before we went on a break, I asked Dr. Deo Onda about his take on the reports of bullying in the West Philippine Sea a week after his successful descent to the Emden Deep. Dr. Deo?
Yeah. I think it's not. I mean, it's not trivial, and it's everyone knows it. You know, the reason China gave to the government of the Philippines is that these ships were just taking cover because of the bad weather. Mm,
Mm.
come on. Looking at the satellite, I was talking to some of my meteorologist friends. You know, and even the season, the summer season in the West Philippine Sea is one of the calmest. You
Right.
would actually, it's like a mirror, you know. It's very calm. Even if there are a few disturbances, it wouldn't actually. And have you seen their ships? They're actually quite
Well,
big.
massive.
They're,
True.
these are massive. You know, these are the kinds of ship that might actually need not to take cover during
Mhm.
this weather conditions. So it is, as I described earlier, there are indication, at least in my opinion, that this is still part of the four phases of Chinese aggression. It's
Mm.
actually, I think they're testing waters right now. They're testing how
Literally?
literally, right? Oh, it's more come inside and so. But yeah,
It's
I
pun
mean,
intended. Okay.
yeah, it's fun and fun. But yeah, I mean, I think they're testing waters on how the government would react, and if there could be another Scarborough Shoal or another feature incident again in the West Philippine Sea. They've done the same thing in the past, right? And it worked.
They were
Yeah,
able to
true.
Maybe
get
not
away with it.
now.
Yeah,
They were
true.
able to get away with it. So I think they're just testing again. Let's just take everything one by one. And as what Professor J. Batong Bakal also said, the positioning of these ships are not random, you know. These are strategic because
Yeah,
they
yeah.
Right.
have bases. They've got the Mischief Reef just a couple of miles away. So if it is a military base, the logical thing to do is to also secure the waters
True.
around these bases. So these are not random. There is a reason why they're there. And I think, yeah, there's no other way to call it but bullying and occupation, illegal occupation.
Hmm. Yes. Okay, go, Eric.
All right. Well, basically, we're now going to accommodate or to. Ah,
I have a
Miles, do you have
question.
anything? Go ahead.
Yeah.
That's the question.
Yeah, okay. So we had previous conversation when I said we had. It's like a week ago. You were saying because when we talk about bullying in West Philippine Sea, we talk about military powers, as what you were
Mm-mm.
saying. But then you were trying to point out that we must have this conversation, or we must have this position as early as now, because we are in this protection efforts, but when the time comes that we were able to get the full authority in the West Philippine Sea. We have the full authority, but they're not recognizing it. But when we have that, there's nothing to protect. Can you
Yes,
expound on that?
yes, yes. As a scientist, we see the benefits of the West Philippine Sea beyond food. We see the benefits of the West Philippine Sea and the role it play beyond militaristic strategies. We see it more holistically and how it is actually connected to our everyday life. As I've mentioned
Right.
earlier, there are ecological services that sustain us, but we just do not directly, see or feel it. And by the minute, by the minute that we allow destruction of the coral reefs, by the minute that we allow illegal fishing to happen, by the minute that we allow these reclamations to actually, go on, we are also destroying some of the ecological services that sustain us. And
Right.
our fear, and my fear as a scientist, is that we are all, clogged up with this idea that we need to protect, that we need to claim these waters, that we need to put barriers on this, that we need to put fences on things. But probably by the time that we come up with an agreement of who owns what and where, there's nothing to protect down there anymore.
Anymore. True.
There are no ecological services that would actually be rendered to us anymore. So what's the point, right? I
Mhm.
think at the basic of it, our humanity should come in and look at it as an ecological crisis. How are we all benefiting from the West Philippine Sea and its connection to the South China Sea? I just would like to point out that fishes don't know passports,
Right.
that coral reefs actually don't have fences, and that the oceans, it is one big ecosystem. So
Mhm.
whatever happens to the environment in the West Philippine Sea will ultimately have an effect on the ecological services that it render to the entirety of the South China Sea territories or the littoral states surrounding the South China Sea. So that's what we are calling for. Bef-
Mhm.
it's okay that we talk about claims, but let's not forget to protect it. Protect it, and then let's talk about the claims.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Amen.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dea. So we're going to entertain some of the questions that were posted by our live audience.
We have
So
a
first,
lot.
we have a lot actually.
I'm
So
gonna take a break there, joke.
first off is from another friend, Hannah Nario Lopez. Hi H, nice seeing you
Hi.
here. How have different administrations responded to the protection of our seas, and how has this affected public discourse?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. Different administrations, at least in my very limited knowledge
Mm.
and
um,
limited
you,
also
you
understanding of
started
it.
when?
I started my work in the MSI in 2010, but my heavy involvement in 2018 with the West Philippine Sea.
Oh,
Right.
okay. So two
Yeah,
administrations.
yeah,
All
to
right.
administrations. But at least going back from the past, there were already investments. For example, in the Ramos administration, the first marine science laboratory was actually erected in Pag-asa. So there was
Oh wow.
already a
Mm,
recognition as early as the 90s that we need to have a marine scientific research station there.
Mhm.
The problem with that station is that it was erected, it was used for a couple of months, but
was
Nobody
destroyed?
returned back.
it continually deteriorated.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah, I think I'm not knowledgeable. I with the Gloria administration, for example, there was a joint marine scientific research expedition with China, and that's the
Mm.
time when they went to the reed bank and looked at the possibility of having fossil fuel deposits in the reed bank,
Mm.
right? But the problem with that joint expedition, after the expedition, all the data went to China and nothing went to the Philippines, and the deal
Wow.
just broke off,
It's like a due
right?
diligence already.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already a red flag, right?
Mm.
The Aquino administration was a bit more aggressive with filing of the arbitral ruling, which is now a landmark case for many of the territorial disputes in the seas, and also I think a recognition of our sovereign rights in our waters. Um, I think the Aquino administration was really a bit more aggressive on that. Uh, Duterte administration, well, we already know where we are right now. I think
Mm.
there's not much to expound there. But I also would like to acknowledge in 2018 when the issue of the Chinese vessel coming in um, resulted in some of the major issues in marine scientific research and the banning of MSR altogether.
Mhm.
The UPMSI, together with the Senate of the Philippines, started talking how can we expand our own marine scientific research endeavors. And it was in that time that we sought and lobbied for the support of the different agencies, including the National Security Council, because we
Mhm.
believe that security, when we talk about security, we shouldn't really be talking about militaristic. We should be
Right.
talking about ecological security, food security,
Food
and
security.
marine scientific research plays a big role on that. So we tried to convince the government to invest more in marine scientific research. MSR activity is also very strategic for the country because it allows you to have a civilian activity in a territory that you recognize as your
Right.
own. For example, the West Philippine Sea. the Filipinos being allowed to do scientific research, there is a recognition that these are our waters and we do
Or
not need
yeah,
permission from any other country. So that is
it's already
actually
like
a
a
good,
territorial position. Yeah.
yeah, it is a strong territorial position.
Mm-mm.
Um, but the during I also need to acknowledge that during this administration, our lobbying actually made resulted into some developments. We were given a grant, a funding to actually procure four more research vessels. So we are now
Mm.
buying four research vessels. Along with the funding for the vessels is are also funding to do research itself. And that's the reason why we are going back to the West Philippine Sea next week. We will
Wow.
be in a
Yeah.
series of legs of expeditions because we now got the money to actually go there. And not only that, we got the money to also train other HEIs or state universities
Mhm. Higher
to
Mm-hmm.
actually
education.
higher education learning institutions to actually decentralize expertise and multiply manpower.
Of
So
course.
yeah, different probably on the more political side, the current administration really is a bit lacking on that side, but also with this administration, we're able to convince many agencies and also some of the policymakers to actually support and invest more in marine scientific research.
Okay.
So the opportunities actually for young Filipinos to do
More researches.
more research is, there's a bright future for young marine scientists in the Philippines.
That's right. Now, I think this was just published this morning that new diplomatic protests filed over Chinese vessels lingering in the West Philippine Sea. So, although, as you were saying earlier, the position of the Philippine government right now is not
As
uh,
aggressive.
as aggressive as the previous administration, somehow there are efforts like this, right?
Yeah. I was following the Twitter thread of FSA Foreign Secretary Teddy Boy
Vaccine.
Locsin.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyway,
yeah.
Luxin.
And yeah, this is a personal opinion of mine, and sometimes I just would like to suggest to this administration and the different offices to have just one group chat so they can talk and
True.
and be on the same page.
You
You
signal.
know?
No, I'm not promoting any apps, but yeah,
So yeah,
it's so public.
it's funny that the secretary is admonishing the different offices, including the National Task Force on West Philippine Sea, on some of the actions. So yeah,
It's
I think it's a
interesting.
bit. I don't know the proper term for that. It's decentralized. It's yeah.
They've achieved the decentralization that you were aiming for.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay. We have a comment here from Giovanni Shalbo. I hope I pronounced your name right. Dear Sir Eric, as a listener and member of security industry, this is for you, Deo, of course. Is there a future programs for our Filipino seafarers to be involved?
Mm.
Interesting. In the coordination with our government forces, with their actual experience in the seas, I think we can get valuable and useful additional information from them. Oh, that's true. We have a
That's
lot.
true. Yeah. I cannot speak on behalf of the government on this, but at least on the scientists, we have been working and still trying to work with the Filipino seafarers.
Right.
Um, there are certain oceanographic equipment that we can just install or ask them to deploy while they are on the way. So this collects data, a lot of data, wave height, speed, current, temperature, salinity, and we need these profiles to further understand our waters. And because we are limited with our capacity to go out there, the different vessels in the industry can actually contribute to the data gathering. And we've been working with them on this. We have a couple of ships where we installed a couple of equipment, and
Mm-hmm.
the partnership had been very well, for so far. The other things that we might need to look at is that the Philippines now has the marine science policy. It was a policy drafted by the National Coast Watch Council and has been enacted into a circular by the president, which actually looks at how the different industries related to the maritime,
Mm-hmm.
science, tourism, trade, business, seafaring, how all of these industries can actually work together to come up with a more long-term vision on how to develop the maritime industry. So there's already a template for this. I think it just needs uh,
Cascading.
cascading, and also I think law, a policy, really a law to make it long
Mhm.
term.
Yeah.
Okay.
We have another question from Mr. Hermy Colina, although I think we've already answered this, but just to recognize it, has there been any collaboration, marine exploration or research programs with the People Republic of China in the West Philippine Sea? I think they have already answered that. We have another question from Miss Krisa Donida. Hi, Krisa. I recently have watched sea piracy, and they said that the biggest problem that contributes to marine life deterioration is not garbage, but commercial fishing. And the solution presented is just not to consume fish. Do you agree?
No.
Mm.
I think we need an entire episode again for seaspiracy.
Right.
But I personally disagree with many of the, it's a good advocacy to let people know what are the possible implications of illegal fishing and wrong practices in fisheries. But I disagree with many, many of the points that were raised in that
Right.
documentary. I would not go further, go or elaborate on that, but
It's a
because I
different
think
conversation.
Atik Risa, I think we need a beer session over this to talk about it. But yeah, I don't disagree in probably 90 to 98% of what the documentary is trying to call
Mm.
for.
Okay.
Let me just point out another question from Mr. Hermy Colina. Hi, Sir Hermy. On food security, do you think our marine resources, especially in the West Philippine Sea, are still enough to sustain the country for the years to come?
There are projections that we are already possibly reaching carrying capacity, meaning the maximum, the threshold that the environment can hold to provide
Mm.
us with the services. If there are different models, you have different scenarios. These are all projections anyway. If the current practices, including Chinese militia and Chinese illegal fishing fleets, continue their practice in the South China Sea, we might actually go into a fisheries collapse, which will be at the point, which might reach a point where it's so difficult for it to bounce back.
Mhm.
These are just projections, and I think the more important question there is what can we do, right? We know that this could happen, but I think we need to focus on the question, what can we do now so that this won't happen?
Okay. Another question from Mr. Ramil Maravillon. Considering the fact that Philippines is composed of 7,100 islands, depending if it's low or high tide. No, no,
I
he
think it was already
didn't put that.
7,600. Yeah.
Okay, 7,600. Is there any
41.
consideration? 641. Higher? Lower? Auction type. Okay, is there any consideration of strengthening our naval forces, which at present condition is being used by Chinese Navy? We are underpowered to protect our seas. You're
Well,
not
I
from
think
FP, but
Eric might be in a better position to
to
answer that
answer
one.
I
that,
think this is more of like a,
a suggestion.
yeah. But I don't think Deo will be the right person to discuss this,
Yeah,
considering that, this is more of like a government force kind of
Yeah,
discourse.
yeah.
yeah, but
But we
here's
know,
okay. Go
no, but we
there.
also know that there's the AFP Modernization Program, right?
Right.
The
Exactly.
long-term program. So we
Mm-mm.
know that there is an effort actually to ramp up the development and then updating of the facilities, infrastructures, vessels,
Mm-mm.
and all things related to the different departments or sectors of the armed forces of the Philippines. So I think it should come in there. But yeah, I agree probably in some aspects of it that we might need to ramp up a bit more. We might need
Mm-mm.
to increase our rate of the development.
Yeah, they're in the process of the acquisition. Now they okay. I want to ask this, but if it concerns vital security information, please don't answer. Okay, but
I
we
won't
have
answer.
seen,
Yes.
but we have seen in the report of Shara Zambrano that how the recent aggression of Chinese militia in the West Philippine Sea. Now, if you're going to do your
Do your
research next
expedition.
week,
Yeah.
yeah, next week, um, do you have any support from the armed forces of the Philippines? Are you
I'll be
Or are
going?
we
I will
expecting the same aggression?
I will be on FB live and then telling everyone no, no, no. So I just would like also probably it's an opportunity to explain to majority of the Filipinos, when you do marine scientific research, there is a coordinating body under the National Coast Watch Council called
Okay.
CONMIRA. CONMIRA is an interagency committee that actually coordinates all the scientific missions. What do we talk about in those meetings? What platforms to use, the schedules, the security threats, the
Like
coordination,
itinerary.
everything considered, the weather. So everything is actually considered. So before an expedition could actually happen, months and months and months of preparation and coordination with the national government agencies.
Okay.
In case of the West Philippine Sea, for example, we need to coordinate with the CONMIRA, which will and then we propose them the plan, and the plan needs to be approved, or not really approved but reviewed by the National Task Force on the West Philippine Sea. And it is from the National Task Force West Philippine Sea where we get the directives, or at least sort of a clearance. Are we actually free to go? Is the security threat okay? How are we going to do with the rules of engagement? What will happen in case
Mhm.
we actually encounter? All of those are actually considered. So there are rules of engagement. A scientist, what should we do when we see a foreign vessel coming in, or if they're trying to block us? So those are all considered.
Nice.
In terms of security, we are also tasked to coordinate with Western Command
Mhm.
in Puerto Princesa. So we are actually being surveilled. And right now, I was just talking to the executive deputy director of the Philippine Space Agency, because
Mhm.
we now have the Diwata satellite, right,
Right.
flying
Mm,
the
The
space. So it is a possibility now to capture images, to
monitor you
send
from
us to
space.
send yes, and or send us the
That's
the
nice. Yeah.
locations of the vessels, and for us to actually have a basis on how to assess how we can move forward.
We're not
So all of these are
violating any private information or security information here, right? We're safe,
no, no,
okay?
no, no.
Okay, good. Now it's your turn, Eric.
All right. We have a question from Miles Eric Gole Ojales. I hope I
Wow.
pronounced her name right.
Oh, it's the
It's like
combination of our
Miles
names.
and then Eric.
Why do I know all of these names?
What is your message to the aspiring Filipino scientist currently under undergraduate program? I think this is one of your students, Deo, that is eager to contribute to marine science and to the community.
I always remind the Filipino people that we are a maritime nation, and that we are a maritime people. There are different ways on how to contribute to national growth. There are different ways on how to contribute to environmental conservation. But I always believe that, a foundation of a developing country is the science, the knowledge of
Mm.
its own environment, of its own people, and its own resources. And one way to actually to contribute concretely on that is to do research by becoming a scientist. So hopefully, with the stories that I've shared about the West Philippine Sea, my adventure in the Emden Deep, I hope they would actually see something out of it. They would see that there is a possibility to have a career in the sciences and the research, and at the same time contribute to national sovereignty, national patrimony, and then also contribute to the national growth through scientific initiatives and endeavors.
Mhm.
Okay. Last question from Sir Giovanni. Is it also possible for higher education officials to educate our students in schools nationwide to learn all the information that you're discussing in this meeting? If so, then we will be producing great individuals with broad understanding on our seas and territories.
I, Give me a few minutes on this. As an oceanographer and as a marine scientist, many of the textbooks that we are using were actually written by Western scholars with
Right.
observations that were gathered from the Atlantic, the Arctic, the north of the Pacific. Imagine we are trying to understand the oceans, and yet those understandings were based on their observations in the different parts of the world. Right now, there is an effort on our part as Filipino scientists, and we thought that it was actually a moral obligation to write our own textbooks based on our
Yes.
own experiences, based on our observations in our own backyard, incorporating context in politics, geopolitics, economics, and humanities. Because I think we need to re-educate again the Filipino people that we again are a maritime nation. And the best way to do that is for them to understand what is happening within our waters, within our territory, and with our people. So that's the effort right now to actually come up with our own reference textbooks.
Interesting. That's
Very
very good
interesting.
news.
Deo, I just one final question. I just remembered it. Baka hindi ako makatulog if I don't ask this. So,
Final na, nagsisimula pa lang ako.
you've mentioned a while ago or earlier na parang, sometimes when we deal about territorial disputes, most of the time we talk about, military, security, so on and so forth. And then you've mentioned that science could also play an important role in, mediating or neutralizing those particular tensions. I'm just wondering if you could share us like specific, remedies or specific
Recommendations.
recommendations.
Yeah, so one thing that we are pushing for is I always believe that environmental issue is always a neutral ground because we are all affected by it and we all can contribute to it, right? So one thing that the MSI has been pushing for in the past decades, even before I was born, was the creation of marine protected areas and a network of marine protected areas within the South China Sea. So we've been vocal about it. We've been inviting different governments on it. We've pushed for different initiatives to actually make it into a reality. So that's one. Actually calling for the different countries to contribute in the establishment of marine protected areas in the different areas of the South China Sea, including the West Philippine Sea and the Spratlys Island Group. The second is actually joint expeditions in the South China Sea. One concrete example of this is the endeavor that we had with Vietnam. It's called JOMSTRE, Joint Ocean Marine Scientific Research Expedition, which already happened 4 times in the past 2 decades. And it was a good initiative because it allowed confidence building between countries. It allowed technical and expertise exchange and actually also resulted in many scientific publications and literature that we are now using to understand the South China Sea. And we are now talking about another stage of this JOMSTRE, another stage of this partnership. And we hope for it to actually to be pushed forward because I think it is a great platform. There are still a lot of other initiatives that we can do to enjoin other countries to help us in the conservation of the South China Sea. I think, but at the end of it, we just need the support of the government. The government needs to be on the same page with us, right? So we are calling on the government on this.
And also the help from the private sector.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
Of course.
Okay, now Eric will have an interesting segment to close our conversation tonight.
Which we call Quick Talk, Deo. So, Quick Talk, it's very simple. So we'll just basically give you like quick questions, wherein you just have to either choose from 2 options or just give us a short answer. Don't worry, we don't really need a lengthy explanation.
A scientific explanation.
Right. So this is just for fun and just to end the episode on a lighter note. All right. Ready. Desk work or field work?
Field work.
This is not part of the quick talk, but I just want to ask: mountains or oceans?
Hard.
I know you so well.
Difficult. Difficult. I would say oceans for now.
Okay.
Dealing with students or dealing with colleagues?
Dealing with students.
Hello to your students. Okay. What is the most stressful and most rewarding part of your job?
Most rewarding is being having the opportunity to mentor. Most stressful is the admin work. I don't like paperwork.
Who does, Deo? Most memorable situation you have been?
The MDMD.
Madami, no?
Oh yeah, the MDND.
Yeah.
All right. Being a speaker or being a conference attendee?
Being a conference attendee at the back with a coffee.
With a coffee, okay.
I have another. UP Baguio, UP Diliman.
Buti na lang, I was able to get my tenureship a couple of weeks ago. UP Baguio.
Oh, congrats!
Sorry, UP Diliman.
Yay,
Congrats.
congratulations. Okay,
Thank
last
you.
three advice you want to give for individuals who want to pursue marine science, research or marine science.
Be curious, be assertive, and have fun.
Oh, thank you
Oh,
so much, Dr. Deo Onda, for such a wonderful discussion. It's such a delight to see you
Tapos na?
tonight. Kaya
yes.
nga
Tapos na. Hindi,
eh.
joke lang.
We hope you had fun as we had
I hope,
fun.
yeah, but
Yeah,
just
as much
let me
as we
take
had
the
fun.
opportunity to thank you, Miles and Eric, for the invitation. I think there is more, there is really a need to, to bridge the
Yeah.
industry, the academe, and the public on issues like this. We need to talk about it. We need to discuss it, and we need to let the public know their options and what should be their positions. So thank you for the opportunity, and it was nice to see you again.
Yes. Likewise, they.
Ikaw
Well,
naman.
I hope this is not the last time. You still have. We
You
could
need to
do like
update
private
us.
Zoom conversations sometime with. So, all right.
Yeah.
So, we'd like to thank everyone who tuned in and participated in Business Profiles and Black Pearl Security Podcast, Simply Security.
And to get the latest security information in the Philippines and for upcoming events, do not forget to follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn at Black Pearl Consultancy under Information Services and Twitter at Black Pearl _INC. Please also subscribe to our YouTube channel at Black Pearl Consultancy and give a like to our videos.
We'd also like to give special thanks to our production team, Alan, as well, Krisa, and then as well, RR. And of course, our managing director, Mr. Joseph Guetta, for
Who's with
making this
us?
program possible, who's also watching right
Yeah.
now. So, yeah.
Again, this is Miles.
And this is Eric,
This has been Simply Security.
helping you streamline security easily. Good night, guys. Thank you very
Good
much,
night,
Deo. Nice seeing you
Deo.
again.
Salamat.
Bye bye.